At 7:24 a.m. on February 24, 2023, a frantic voice spoke into her cell phone from inside a large colonial home on a quiet cul-de-sac in Herndon, Virginia. Juliana Pérez Magalhães, a 22-year-old Brazilian au pair, was calling 911 to report what she described as an appalling scene unfolding in the master bedroom above her dot by the time Fairfax County police officers arrived at the Banfield residence. 2 people were dead. Christine Banfield, a 37-year-old intensive care nurse, lay naked except for her socks, bleeding from fatal stab wounds to her neck. Nearby was the body of Joseph Ryan, a 39-year-old man who had arrived at the house that morning for what investigators would later discover was a prearranged sexual encounter. Shot in both the head and chest. People. The crime scene told a story of violence and chaos. A bloody knife lay scattered among the carnage. 2 handguns had been fired. A bag filled with fetish accessories sat in the blood-soaked bedroom. The only survivors were Brendan Banfield, a 38-year-old IRS Criminal Division special agent, his young au pair, and his 4-year-old daughter, found unharmed in the basement. What police initially treated as a home invasion gone wrong would slowly reveal itself as something far more sinister. The young woman who had made those desperate calls for help wasn't just an innocent witness to tragedy. She was a key player in an elaborate murder plot that had been months in the making. Behind the facade of a respectable family employing foreign help to care for their child lay a web of adultery, deception, and ultimately cold-blooded murder that would expose the deadly consequences when secret desires collide with family obligations in America's wealthy suburbs. The Banfield family resided in one of Herndon's most desirable neighborhoods, where large homes on quiet cul-de-sacs housed successful professionals who commuted to high-paying jobs in nearby Washington, D.C. Brendan Banfield worked as a criminal investigator for the Internal Revenue Service, a federal position that required security clearance and carried significant responsibilities in pursuing tax fraud cases. His wife, Christine, served as an intensive care nurse, a demanding profession that required her work long shifts at area hospitals, caring for critically ill patients. The couple had built what appeared to be an ideal suburban life, complete with a young daughter who needed constant care and supervision, while both parents maintained demanding careers. In the spring of 2021, the Banfields made the decision to hire live-in help. Like many affluent American families, they turned to the au pair program, which brings young foreign nationals to the United States to provide childcare in exchange for room, board, and cultural exchange opportunities. Through a placement agency, they selected Juliana Pérez Magalhães, a young woman from Brazil who would live in their home and care for their daughter while learning American customs and improving her English for nearly 2 years. This arrangement appeared to work perfectly, creating the stable household that busy dual-career families depend upon to balance professional success with family responsibilities. The deadly events of February 24, 2023, began taking shape weeks earlier when Brendan Banfield created a profile on Feud Life, an online platform dedicated to connecting people interested in alternative sexual practices and encounters. Using photographs of his wife Christine without her knowledge or consent, Banfield crafted a deceptive online persona designed to lure unsuspecting men to his home. The profile suggested that Christine was interested in engaging in rough sexual encounters with strangers, particularly scenarios involving bondage and domination. Banfield used this fake profile to initiate contact with Joseph Ryan, a 39-year-old man who responded to what he believed were Christine's own messages, expressing interest in a sexual meeting. Through carefully crafted communications, Banfield arranged for Ryan to come to the family home on the morning of February 24th. Ryan believed he was meeting Christine for a consensual encounter that she had specifically requested. He had no knowledge that he was being lured into an elaborate trap orchestrated by Christine's husband, who had been planning something far more sinister than an extramarital encounter. On the night before the planned meeting, Banfield made sure to position himself away from the family home. He informed his wife that he needed to leave early for work, but instead of going to his IRS office, he drove to a McDonald's parking lot several miles away. This carefully planned alibi would allow him to claim he was nowhere near the house when the violence occurred. Meanwhile, inside the Banfield home, Juliana Pears Magalhaes was preparing for her role in the deadly conspiracy. She and Brendan had been conducting a secret sexual affair for months, communicating through text messages, sharing intimate photographs, and meeting for clandestine encounters. The affair had evolved beyond mere physical attraction into something far more dangerous, a shared commitment to eliminating the obstacle that prevented them from being together openly. When Joseph Ryan arrived at the Banfield residence that morning, he expected to find Christine alone and willing to engage in a rough sexual encounter that had been arranged through their online communications. Instead, he walked into a carefully orchestrated murder scene where nothing was as it appeared. The exact sequence of violence that followed remains disputed, but the physical evidence tells a clear story of premeditated murder rather than self-defense. Christine Banfield was brutally stabbed multiple times in the neck with a knife, wounds that would prove fatal despite her husband's claimed absence from the scene. The attack occurred while she was naked, suggesting she had been preparing for what she believed would be a normal morning in her own home. Joseph Ryan was shot twice, once in the head and once in the chest. A fatal shot came from a second gun that Juliana Pears Magalhaes retrieved from a bathroom safe after receiving the access code from Brendan Banfield. This second weapon had been purchased specifically for the plan, and both Banfield and Magalhaes had practiced using it at a local firing range in the weeks leading up to the murders. After the killings, Magalhaes placed 2 frantic 911 calls, claiming that a stranger had entered the home and was attacking Christine. Her voice conveyed panic and terror as she described the violence she was witnessing, but investigators would later determine that her calls were part of an elaborate performance designed to create the impression that she and Brendan were innocent, victims of a random crime. The crime scene that police discovered appeared to support the story that Magalhaes and Banfield would tell: a home invasion where a stranger had attacked Christine and been shot while committing his crimes. Fetish accessories were scattered around the bedroom, suggesting that Ryan had brought them for his planned encounter with Christine. The presence of these items would initially lead investigators to consider whether the violence had occurred during a sexual encounter gone wrong. However, crucial details at the scene raised immediate questions about the official story. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, suggesting that Ryan had been admitted willingly. The positioning of the bodies and the distribution of blood evidence indicated that the victims had been moved after they were killed, pointing to staging rather than spontaneous violence. Most importantly, forensic analysis would later reveal that Joseph Ryan's arms had been smeared with Christine's blood after both victims were already dead. This evidence of post-mortem manipulation would prove that someone had deliberately arranged the crime scene to support a false narrative about what had occurred. The 4-year-old Banfield daughter was found unharmed in the basement, having been kept away from the violence that destroyed her family. Her presence in the home during the murders would add another layer of complexity to the case, as investigators tried to understand how the killers had managed their deadly plan while ensuring the child's safety. Detective Sarah Chun of the Fairfax County Police Department arrived at the Banfield home within minutes of the initial 911 calls, bringing 2 decades of homicide investigation experience to what initially appeared to be a tragic home invasion. Her first assessment of the crime scene revealed several inconsistencies that immediately raised questions about the official story being provided by the survivors. The absence of forced entry was the first red flag that caught Chun's attention. Every door and window showed no signs of being forced open, suggesting that Joseph Ryan had been admitted to the home willingly rather than breaking in to commit a crime. This detail contradicted the narrative that Magalhaes and Banfield were providing about a violent stranger attacking their family. Chun's examination of the blood evidence revealed even more troubling discrepancies. The distribution and patterns of blood throughout the master bedroom indicated that both victims had been moved after they sustained their fatal injuries. This type of post-mortem staging suggested careful planning rather than the chaotic struggle that would be expected during a genuine home invasion. The positioning of weapons at the scene also raised immediate suspicions. 2 different handguns had been used in the shooting, which was unusual for a single perpetrator acting spontaneously. More significantly, ballistics analysis would later show that one of the guns belonged to Brendan Banfield as part of his federal law enforcement equipment, while the second weapon had been purchased recently and stored in a bathroom safe within the home. Detective Chun's initial interviews with the survivors revealed additional inconsistencies that warranted deeper investigation. Juliana Pears Magalhaes provided a detailed account of hearing commotion upstairs and responding to Brendan's instructions to retrieve a second weapon from the bathroom safe. Her story included specific details about receiving the safe's access code and using the gun to shoot Joseph Ryan in what she claimed was defense of Christine's life. However, the timeline that Magalhaes provided didn't align with the physical evidence at the scene. Forensic analysis showed that Christine had already been fatally stabbed before Ryan was shot, making it impossible for Magalhaes to have been defending her employer's life when she fired the weapon. This contradiction suggested that the au pair was providing a rehearsed story rather than an accurate account of spontaneous events. Brendan Banfield's alibi also came under intense scrutiny during the initial phase of the investigation. He claimed to have been at work when the violence occurred, but cell phone records showed that he was actually waiting in a McDonald's parking lot, several miles from both his office and his home. His deliberate deception about his whereabouts during the murders indicated advanced planning rather than innocent absence. The breakthrough in the case came when Chun's team discovered the FET Life communications that had been used to lure Joseph Ryan to the Banfield home. Digital forensics experts were able to trace the fake profile back to Brendan Banfield, revealing that he had been using his wife's photographs without her knowledge to create an elaborate deception designed to bring potential victims to their house. The messages exchanged between the fake profile and Joseph Ryan painted a clear picture of premeditation. Banfield had spent weeks crafting communications that portrayed Christine as eager to engage in rough sexual encounters with strangers, specifically requesting meetings that would involve bondage and domination scenarios. Ryan's responses showed that he believed he was communicating directly with Christine and had no knowledge that he was being manipulated by her husband. Cell phone records provided additional evidence of the conspiracy between Banfield and Magalhaes. The investigation revealed hundreds of text messages exchanged between the two in the months leading up to the murders, including intimate photographs and explicit discussions of their sexual relationship. More damaging were messages that appeared to reference their plans for eliminating Christine as an obstacle to their relationship. Particularly incriminating was the discovery that both Banfield and Magalhaes had replaced their cell phones shortly before the murders, suggesting an attempt to destroy evidence of their communications and planning. This deliberate destruction of potential evidence indicated consciousness of guilt and advance planning of criminal activity. Financial records revealed another layer of the conspiracy when investigators discovered that Banfield had been making payments for shooting range sessions that included Magalhaes as a participant. These records showed that the pair had been practicing with firearms together in the weeks leading up to the murders, specifically using the type of weapon that would later be used to kill Joseph Ryan. The firing range visits were particularly significant because they demonstrated that Magalhaes had been trained to use the weapon that she would later claim to have fired in spontaneous self-defense. The timing and frequency of these practice sessions suggested that her shooting of Ryan was planned and rehearsed rather than a desperate act of protection. Detective Chun also uncovered evidence that the conspiracy involved careful staging of the crime scene after the murders occurred. Forensic analysis showed that Joseph Ryan's arms had been deliberately smeared with Christine's blood, while both victims were already dead, creating a false impression that Ryan had been attacking Christine when he was shot. This post-mortem manipulation of the bodies required detailed knowledge of crime scene investigation and evidence analysis, suggesting that Banfield had used his law enforcement training to create a misleading narrative about the events. The staging was sophisticated enough to initially fool first responders, but ultimately failed to withstand thorough forensic examination. The investigation also revealed that the bag of fetish accessories found at the crime scene had been planted to support the story that Ryan had come to the house with criminal intent. Analysis of these items showed no fingerprints or DNA, evidence linking them to Ryan, suggesting they had been placed at the scene by the conspirators to strengthen their false narrative about a sexual assault gone wrong. Just as investigators believed they had assembled a clear picture of the conspiracy between Brendan Banfield and Juliana Pears Magalhaes, a stunning discovery would fundamentally alter their understanding of the case and reveal that the murders were part of an even more elaborate and disturbing scheme than anyone had imagined. The revelation came when digital forensics specialists conducting a deeper analysis of Banfield's electronic devices discovered that the FET Life profile used to lure Joseph Ryan wasn't the first fake account he had created. Hidden in deleted files and internet browsing history, investigators found evidence that Banfield had been operating multiple deceptive online profiles for more than 6 months before the murders, using Christine's photographs to attract different men to their home. What shocked investigators most was the discovery that Joseph Ryan wasn't the first victim of this elaborate scheme. Computer records revealed at least 3 other men who had been contacted through similar fake profiles and invited to the Banfield home for sexual encounters that Christine knew nothing about. 2 of these men had actually visited the house on different occasions, creating potentially dangerous situations that Christine had been completely unaware of. Even more disturbing was the realization that some of these previous encounters had been photographed and recorded without the knowledge of the men involved. Banfield had installed hidden cameras in the master bedroom and was creating illegal recordings of sexual encounters between his wife and strangers who believed they were engaging in consensual activities that Christine had requested. This evidence revealed that what investigators had initially understood as a murder plot motivated by an affair between Banfield and Magalhaes was actually part of a much more complex scheme involving sexual exploitation, blackmail, and systematic deception that had been operating for months before the fatal encounter with Joseph Ryan. The hidden recordings also revealed another shocking truth about the relationship between Banfield and his au pair. Analysis of the timestamps on the recordings showed that Magalhaes had been aware of and participating in the elaborate scheme from its earliest stages. She had not only known that Banfield was luring men to their home for encounters with his unwitting wife, but had actively helped facilitate these meetings. In several of the recordings, Magalhaes could be seen positioning cameras, arranging lighting, and even participating in some of the encounters themselves. This evidence contradicted her claims to investigators that she had been an innocent employee who was manipulated by her employer into participating in a single act of violence. Instead, it showed that she had been a willing and active participant. in a long-term conspiracy involving sexual exploitation and systematic deception. The discovery of the recordings also revealed that Christine Banfield had begun to suspect that something was wrong in the weeks before her murder. In conversations captured on the hidden cameras, she could be heard questioning her husband about men who had contacted her directly, claiming to have met her online when she had no memory of such interactions. These recordings showed Christine becoming increasingly suspicious and frightened as she realized that someone was using her identity and photographs to create fake online profiles. In her final recorded conversation, just days before her murder, she could be heard threatening to contact police about what she suspected was identity theft and online impersonation. This evidence revealed that Christine's murder wasn't just the result of her husband's affair with their au pair, but was also motivated by the need to silence her before she could expose the broader criminal scheme that had been operating under her own roof. Her growing awareness of the fake profiles and her threats to involve law enforcement had made her a liability that Banfield and Magalhaes felt they needed to eliminate. Perhaps most shocking of all was the discovery that the couple had been planning to continue their scheme after Christine's death. Electronic evidence showed that they had already created new fake profiles using photographs stolen from other women and were in the process of identifying additional victims who could be lured to the house for future exploitation. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Banfield had been using his position as a federal law enforcement officer to conduct background checks on potential victims, ensuring that the men he targeted were unlikely to be missed quickly if they became victims of violence. This abuse of his federal authority added additional federal charges to an already complex criminal case. Financial records revealed another dimension to the scheme when investigators discovered that Banfield had been collecting money from some of the men he had lured to his home. Through various online payment platforms, he had been receiving hundreds of dollars from men who believed they were paying Christine for sexual encounters. This evidence showed that the scheme involved not just sexual exploitation and murder, but also organized fraud on a significant scale. The most disturbing revelation came when investigators realized that the 4-year-old Banfield daughter had been present in the home during many of the previous encounters involving unsuspecting victims, and her mother. This discovery added child endangerment charges to the growing list of crimes and revealed the shocking extent to which Banfield and Magalhaes had been willing to put an innocent child at risk to continue their criminal activities. The prosecution of Brendan Banfield and Juliana Pears Magalhaes would become one of the most complex and high-profile murder cases in Fairfax County history. Commonwealth's attorney Steve Descano assembled a specialized prosecution team that included experts in domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and federal crimes to address the multiple layers of criminal activity that had been uncovered during the investigation. Juliana Pears Magalhaes faced the most immediate legal jeopardy when she was arrested on October 13, 2023, and charged with second-degree murder in the death of Joseph Ryan. Her defense team, led by experienced criminal attorney Maria Rodriguez, initially planned to argue that she had acted in self-defense and had been manipulated by her employer into participating in violence she never intended to commit. However, as prosecutors revealed the extent of evidence showing Magalhaes' active participation in the broader criminal scheme, her legal position became increasingly untenable. The discovery of recordings showing her willing participation in the fake profile operation and her knowledge of previous victims made it impossible to maintain that she was merely an innocent employee who had been coerced into a single act of violence. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence if convicted at trial, Magalhaes decided to enter into plea negotiations with prosecutors. The discussions were complicated by her status as a foreign national, which created additional legal issues related to immigration and potential deportation after serving any sentence. On October 29, 2024, just days before her murder trial was scheduled to begin, Magalhaes reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. She agreed to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter in the death of Joseph Ryan, acknowledging that she had fired the fatal shot, but maintaining that she had not intended to kill him. When she pulled the trigger dot as part of the plea agreement, Magalhaes committed to providing complete cooperation with prosecutors in their case against Brendan Banfield. This cooperation included testifying truthfully about all aspects of the criminal scheme, providing details about the planning that preceded the murders, and admitting to her own role in the broader conspiracy involving sexual exploitation and fraud. The plea agreement also addressed the question of sentencing for Magalhaes. Prosecutors agreed to recommend a sentence of time served, meaning that she could potentially be released from custody immediately after sentencing if she continued to cooperate fully with the investigation. However, she still faced the possibility of up to 10 years in prison if the judge rejected the prosecutor's recommendation or if she failed to maintain her cooperation. Brendan Banfield's legal situation was far more complicated and serious. On September 16, 2024, he was indicted on 2 counts of aggravated murder, one for the death of his wife, Christine, and another for the death of Joseph Ryan. These charges carried the possibility of life imprisonment without parole and made Banfield's case a potential capital murder prosecution. Banfield's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Robert Thompson, faced the challenging task of defending against charges supported by extensive physical evidence, digital records, and the anticipated cooperation of his co-conspirator. Their initial strategy focused on challenging the admissibility of evidence obtained through digital searches and questioning the reliability of Magalhaes as a cooperating witness. The defense argued that Banfield had been attempting to protect his family from dangerous individuals who were threatening his wife through online platforms, and that the violence had occurred when one of these encounters went wrong. They maintained that while Banfield may have made poor decisions in creating fake online profiles, he had never intended for anyone to be killed. However, this defense strategy was severely undermined by the extensive evidence of premeditation, including the practice sessions at the firing range, the staged crime scene, and the deliberate creation of false alibis. The discovery of recordings showing the systematic exploitation of Christine and multiple victims made it difficult to portray Banfield as a protective husband rather than a calculating predator. Banfield's trial was scheduled to begin in February 2025, with prosecutors indicating that they intended to seek the maximum penalties available under Virginia law. The case attracted significant media attention due to the unusual nature of the crimes and the involvement of a federal law enforcement officer in such an elaborate criminal scheme. The legal proceedings also involved complex questions about the admissibility of the hidden recordings that had been made without the consent of the participants. Defense attorneys argued that these recordings should be excluded from evidence, while prosecutors maintained that they were crucial to understanding the full scope of the criminal conspiracy and the motives for the murders. The case of Brendan Banfield and Juliana Pears Magalhaes stands as one of the most shocking examples of how trusted relationships within wealthy households can mask elaborate criminal conspiracies that ultimately turn deadly. What began as a seemingly routine employment arrangement between a successful family and their live-in childcare provider evolved into a web of sexual exploitation, systematic deception, and premeditated murder that destroyed multiple lives. The investigation revealed how modern technology and social media platforms can be weaponized by criminals to create elaborate schemes targeting innocent victims. Banfield's use of his wife's identity to lure unsuspecting men into dangerous situations represents a new form of predatory behavior that law enforcement agencies are still learning to recognize and combat. Perhaps most disturbing is how the presence of a young child in the household failed to deter the conspirators from pursuing their criminal activities. The willingness of both Banfield and Magalhaes to endanger an innocent 4-year-old while pursuing their scheme reveals a level of callousness that shocked even experienced investigators. The case also highlights the vulnerability of foreign workers. In domestic employment situations, where isolation and dependence on employers can create conditions that facilitate both exploitation and criminal conspiracy. As Banfield awaits trial and Magalhaes faces sentencing, questions remain about how many other victims may have been targeted by their scheme and whether similar operations are currently endangering other families and communities across America.